Demon Slayer outclasses Jujutsu Kaisen is probably the most controversial thing you've ever heard. Well, not really. My point is this is an unpopular opinion. And in this video, I'll be explaining why I think Demon Slayer is better than Jujutsu Kaisen on a fundamental level. So I'm going to be comparing the plot, the main character, other characters, animation and fights, power system and so on, and I'll tell you why I think JJK gets outclassed by Demon Slayer. First, the plot. In talks of Demon Slayer's plot, you hear stuff like it's simple, and simple doesn't always mean bad. The thing is, how often does simple mean bad? And how often does complex mean good? A plot doesn't get points for being complex, so that mindset of complex is automatically good needs to be thrown out the window. And there's a lot of people that say Demon Slayer doesn't have a plot or has a bad plot. I mean, the plot is Tanjiro going on a journey to avenge his family and turn his sister back into a human. So first, we've established that there is a plot, so this doesn't hold up. And how is this bad? Besides, a good story is subjective, but then there's Jujutsu Kaisen, and the plot is finding Sukuna's fingers, I guess. I mean, that's supposed to be the overarching goal, right? So they can kill Sukuna once and for all. Should be fun, right? But the problem is that barely happens, and we never feel like we're getting closer to that. Unlike in Demon Slayer where they defeat Akizuki, then Upper Moons, then finally moves on. So the question is, what is my reason for watching the show? It's just this happens, then that happens, and that does not mean it has a complex plot. Then there's the main character. Let me start with Tanjiro. The main criticism of Tanjiro is that he's just a walking archetype of the nice guy, and I'll go further to say he's the perfection of that archetype. The fact that he can still feel sympathy for demons while understanding that they need to be killed shows that he embodies the ideal kindness, the kindness paired with firmness and strength. So my point is, he's not annoyingly kind or kind to a fault. Another thing that makes Tanjiro a good main character is that he impacts everyone he comes in contact with. Despite the fact that he's not the strongest, he has a certain importance in his verse. I mean, you can check it. Everyone he's had an interaction with has been impacted in one way or the other. So he takes that main character role and owns it. Then we have Yuji, and throughout the show I was asking myself,
wait a minute, who are you?
I knew so little about him, I stopped caring. He just moved along with the plot, and that's pretty bad for a main character. He has nothing that sets him apart from the other characters, and he actually gets outshined by them. He certainly doesn't have the impact on his verse that Tanjiro has, and essentially he just felt like a side character in his own show. I have no reason to root for him. He doesn't even have a goal. You can say he's not one-dimensional like Tanjiro, but is that supposed to earn him a point or something? He doesn't have the emotional touch on the story that Tanjiro has. Then the other characters. The characters in Demon Slayer are lively and colorful, and while they are one-dimensional and mostly have one character trait, it was obviously done intentionally, and it works. If an anime can make me emotionally attached to one-dimensional characters more than an anime with supposedly complex characters, then I don't know what to say, I'm impressed. The characters still have a level of depth that's good enough for the story, so they aren't completely shallow. Essentially, they are all very likable and fun to watch. Nothing feels incomplete about the characters, as the characters are mostly balanced and well-rounded. There is the complaint that there is too much of good versus evil and no one is morally gray, and first, that doesn't take anything away from it. Second, and there are bad humans and good demons. They don't need to spell it out for you that, look, these people are morally questionable. Now, the characters in JJK are also colorful and unique, but it's really hard to get attached to them and care about them, as they either get killed off too quick or barely get fleshed out at all. And this is one of the weakest points of JJK. Its character writing is very poor in my opinion. Junpei was a character with potential, but they decided to kill him off, and worse is that his death barely has the impact that it should. Mekamaru gets killed off before we could care about him. Nobara was already an uncompelling character, but then they killed her and decided to give her one of the least moving backstories ever. The backstory of the freaking drum demon does this. Nanami was the only one whose death was somewhat satisfying. Todo is just cringe sometimes. Like, I'm not gonna pretend like this is cool. I like his relationship with Yuji and how stress-free he is. Gojo is Gojo, and Geto is a bit of a complex character, but I'll talk about him and his ideology later. And yeah, like at this point in the show, this is after season 2, there is no character I genuinely care about. Now the villains. As for demons, we know they can't have personal goals, but we do know their feelings and who they were before they became demons. I haven't read the manga, so I don't know much about Akaza and Kokoshi, but I find them interesting and compelling. Every villain so far had a great backstory that either established them as victims or as wicked people. So the people who say the backstories are just so we can feel sorry for them are wrong, because some of the backstories establish them as horrible people, and it essentially just explains why a villain is the way they are. For example, Akaza not eating women. By the way, that got spoiled for me. And for Muzan, we know his motivations, his behaviors and flaws, so we know he's arrogant and makes a lot of mistakes. People calling Muzan a bad character just because he's arrogant and stupid sometimes is odd, because he's presented that way. It's shown that he doesn't see the Demon Slayers as a threat, and he doesn't even care that Akaza killed the Hashira. But I guess you can argue that it makes him less threatening as a villain, but not a bad character. Besides, he has a large power gap between him and the Demon Slayers, so you can't say he's not threatening at all. Then JJK. Sukuna is indeed more threatening than Muzan, but he has nothing to him. He has no motivations, no ambition, no grand plan that we should be fearful of. He just likes to fight and kill. There's no ancient lore about why he's this way. He doesn't even have an ideology about humans like Mahito and Geto. So all this just makes him a really shallow character. So him being cool doesn't make him interesting, but I will admit he is likable. Mahito is an alright villain as well. I admit that he is very competent and threatening, but besides his ideology about human nature, he doesn't have much depth, but I guess that's okay. It's established that his primary purpose is to kill people, so I can't get mad at that. Geto is someone I'll get into as well. Toji is cool, but that doesn't cover the fact that he's not fleshed out. You should have had an arc of him being less cold and selfish, but the only good he does is because he's about to die, not because he genuinely cares. Kenjaku embodies everything JJK kinda gets right and gets wrong. He has this super intricate, carefully thought out master plan, but it's presented poorly to the viewers, and he also has no depth as a character or a real reasoning behind his actions. They just keep him as the shallow villain in the background. Then the power system. For Demon Slayer, the power system is pretty simple and self-explanatory, so it's not hard to follow by any means. Besides sun breathing, no breathing style is above the other, and it all depends on the user. Kinda like bending in Avatar. And the same way elements have sub-elements, is kind of the same way breathing has sub-breathing styles. And the fact that the colors aren't real isn't a problem for me, so yeah, a pretty basic power system that doesn't need to cloud the story. Then there's JJK. And the annoying thing about this is that cursed energy is by no means a bad power system, at least the surface of it. The thing is, it is so poorly explained in the show, it's frustrating. And I didn't get it on first watch, and even when I did, the other things about the power system were also poorly explained. And what's annoying is when JJK fans try to make it look like you weren't smart enough to understand, despite the fact that it's a popular experience, when they literally argue among themselves when discussing the power system. The exposition dumping they do is annoying enough, but the reason it doesn't work is because it assumes you know about the previous concepts. So the exposition dumping is very raw, and it happens in between fights. And when people are watching a fight, they aren't trying to pause to understand what is being talked about, so if they don't understand, they just continue. And after I did understand, I realized the power system had a lot of ass pulls. Like, a bounding vow did not need to exist, especially making a binding vow that allows someone to forget that they made it. The fact that 60 seconds worth of memories flowing through someone's mind can somehow substitute for 60 seconds in real life, just for a seal to work. And how can you even measure memories in time? The author uses the power system to make up stuff as we go on, but it doesn't need to be as complicated as it is. Now the fights and animation. Now one thing that's always great about Demon Slayer fights was the way they made you feel something. There's usually this emotional weight to it, and don't get me started on the tension in these fights that make them feel important. And yeah, the fights are a feast to the eyes, but it's the way it's executed entirely. From the music to the stakes to the animation itself, itself, it's all done to the most it can be. The art style is unique, and the showcase of Japanese art feels so simplistic and natural in a way that complements the show. And I didn't know anything about animation when I started the show, so animation is really just the cherry on top. Then there's JJK. And listen, this is as subjective can get. I wasn't able to enjoy a lot of the fights. First, because there's rarely any tension, because I don't care about a lot of the characters, so it's like whatever really. And we likely already know who's gonna win. Fights like Sukuna versus anyone and Gojo versus anyone are pretty one-sided, and also the amount of info dumping in between fights make it really boring. Like explaining your entire technique to nobody in front of your opponent is just a bit unserious, and the way the fights are animated sometimes is just not for me. A lot of the fights have this thing where they slow it down in between scenes, kind of like a Twixter. Plus they have like really loud sound effects sometimes. And I don't really enjoy that because the characters aren't moving in real time. The animation style changes when a fight starts, and sometimes I just pause and I don't even know what's on my screen. If I pause Demon Slayer, I can tell who's who and what's happening. Like, I'm not gonna pretend Sukuna versus Mahoraga wasn't just bubbles and blurs to me. Like, it's an artistic choice, but art is subjective, and I as a viewer shouldn't need to know about your whole animation process. Then there's this thing about JJK trying to be deep, trying to be complex, trying to be philosophical, and this is where I talk about Geto and his ideology, and it's just kind of weak. At no point was I like, hey, this guy has a point. His experience with humans isn't as traumatizing and thorough as the show tries to make it seem. The idea of killing all humans on Earth and leaving just sorcerers is unrealistic, and also the fact that he has a good experience with a non-sorcerer, but he chooses to hyperfixate on the religious fanatics and a bounty hunter. Literally anyone who's ever had a bad experience with people can adopt his ideology. It's just not that deep, but rather it felt like they were just checking a box for depth. Same with Mahito and the parallel they were trying to do with him and Yuji. I understand Mahito's ideology and why he's the way he is, but Yuji is a rather weak contrast. Yuji ought to embody the best human traits of love and compassion, but his kindness is never really emphasized. He's more innocent than kind. He doesn't represent the good of humanity much better than the next guy. So the I am you didn't hit as hard for me. It just felt manufactured. And Demon Slayer isn't the perfect show either. There are ass pulls like Tanjiro using lightning breathing and Inosuke shifting his heart, but they don't affect the overall narrative. And even if you don't like it, it's explained in a way you understand, so it doesn't confuse you. Demon Slayer makes you feel like you've known these characters for a long time, and it makes you care about them. The show's biggest strengths are great storytelling and emotional moments and characters. JJK does poorly in those areas, in my opinion. Demon Slayer doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it does everything it's trying to do well. Demon Slayer is simplicity. Demon Slayer is shonen. Asking it to be something else is not a critique. JJK tries to show a level of depth and tries to be philosophical, tries to be complex, and in my opinion doesn't succeed all that well. I'm not gonna call it a bad show. I'm not gonna say it's carried by something and that's the only reason people watch it, because I understand fucking nuance. And I'm not gonna outrightly disrespect it because I see why people like it, but it's not for me in more ways than one. I finished season 2 feeling confused and frustrated, and I really tried to enjoy the show. Now I'm not even sure I want to continue. I find Demon Slayer to be more enjoyable than Jujutsu Kaisen. So I had to do a bunch of inner thinking to find out why I like Demon Slayer and why I don't like JJK. Because I really don't watch to critique, I watch to enjoy. If you're still here, comment your channel is trash to confuse people. So yeah, subscribe please, and I'll see you in the next one.